I was having dinner with my family when Jessica looked me straight in the eye and said, "You know what, Timothy? Your stories about the old days are getting really tired. Nobody cares how things used to be done." The whole table went quiet. My son Ryan kept staring at his plate like it was the most interesting thing in the world. My grandkids, Nathan and Sarah, just sat there looking uncomfortable. I felt my jaw clench, but I didn't lose it. I just wiped my mouth with the napkin, stood up slow, and said, "Enjoy your meal, everyone." That was the moment everything changed. But let me back up and tell you how we got there. My name is Timothy Walsh. I'm 58 years old. Been a widower for 4 years now since my Michelle passed from cancer. I spent 35 years in construction, started carrying lumber when I was 23 and worked my way up to running my own small contracting crew, put food on the table, paid for this house, and saved up what I thought was a decent retirement fund. I'm not rich, but I always did right by my family. The house has been in our family for 30 years. Michelle and I bought it when Ryan was just a kid. We painted every room ourselves. Built that deck out back with my own hands during a hot July when we couldn't afford to hire anyone. Every nail, every board has a memory attached to it. After Michelle died, I thought I'd be rattling around in here alone, talking to the walls. Then Ryan suggested he and Jessica move in to help out. Made sense at the time. I was still dealing with the grief. Couldn't sleep through the night, and having family around seemed like the right thing to do. That was my first mistake. Jessica came into our lives about 6 years ago when Ryan met her at some community college event. She's one of those elementary school teachers who thinks her education degree makes her smarter than everyone else. Pretty enough, I guess. And Ryan was completely smitten from day one. But there was always something about her that rubbed me the wrong way. The way she corrected people in conversation. The way she roll her eyes when I tell stories about work or share memories about Michelle. Little things, you know. But I kept my mouth shut because Ryan was happy, and that's what mattered. After they got married and moved in here 4 years ago, things started changing real slow. Jessica would make comments about how the house needed updating and how my workshop in the garage was taking up valuable space that could be better utilized. She'd suggest I should simplify my lifestyle and maybe consider getting rid of Michelle's things because holding on to the past isn't healthy. When I said absolutely not, she'd give me that patronizing teacher smile and say she was just trying to help me process my grief in a healthier way. The dinner that night was supposed to be special. Nathan had made honor roll at school for the 3rd time this year, and Sarah had won first place in some county minus wide art contest. I was proud of those kids. Wanted to tell them how their grandmother would have been bursting with pride. So I started sharing a story about when their dad was their age, how he built this elaborate model airplane that took him weeks to finish. "Grandpa," Nathan said, "tell us about the time Dad tried to fix the roof and fell into the bushes." Sarah giggled. "Yeah, and Grandma made him cookies after he got all scratched up." That's when Jessica decided she'd had enough of the old man talking. "Timothy," she said, cutting me off mid-sentence with that sharp tone she uses on her students. "Don't you think it's time you stop living in the past? These children need to focus on their future, not get bogged down with dusty old stories about people they barely remember." I felt the temperature in the room drop about 10 degrees. I looked at my grandkids. Nathan was 13, Sarah was 9th. They absolutely remembered their grandmother. I know they did because they still asked me questions about her every week, still wanted to see the photo albums, still asked me to make her chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings. I was just sharing a memory, I said, keeping my voice level and calm. Jessica let out this laugh, but it wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh you'd use to make someone feel stupid. That's all you ever do anymore. Share memories. Live in the past. When was the last time you contributed something actually useful to this household instead of just taking up space and expecting everyone to cater to your nostalgia? The room went dead silent. Even the kids stopped moving. Ryan finally looked up from his plate, but instead of saying something to his wife about the way she was talking to his father, he looked at me with this expression that said, "Please don't make this worse and please don't cause a scene." "You know what, Jessica," I said, standing up slowly and placing my napkin on the table. "I think you've said enough." That's when she really let me have it. Have I? Because I think someone needs to say it. You sit around this house all day, reminiscing about the good old days when you actually mattered. But that was then, Timothy. This is now. And right now, you're just a useless old man who can't accept that the world has moved on without him. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. I just looked at Ryan, waiting for him to defend his father, waiting for him to remember who raised him, who taught him how to be a man, who worked double shifts to pay for his college. But Ryan said nothing. He just sat there, staring at his food like a coward. I looked around that table one more time, minus at my son who wouldn't meet my eyes, at my daughter minus Law who was practically smirking, at my grandkids who looked like they wanted to disappear. Then I walked upstairs to my room, not the master bedroom where Michelle and I slept for 25 years minus Jessica had made it clear that was too big for just one person. No, I was in the back bedroom now, the one that used to be Ryan's when he was a teenager. I sat on the edge of that narrow bed and tried to make sense of what had just happened. But it wasn't really about that dinner, was it? It was about everything that had been building up for months. The little comments, the eye rolls, the way Jessica would interrupt me when I was talking to the kids, the way she'd taken over running the household, making decisions about MY house without asking me. That night, lying there staring at the ceiling, something clicked in my brain. It started with a memory from about 6 months ago. I'd gotten a call from the bank asking about some unusual activity on my account. Jessica had answered the phone, talked to them for a few minutes, then hung up and told me it was just a routine security check. Nothing to worry about. But I was starting to worry now. I got up and pulled out the old filing cabinet from my closet. Michelle used to handle most of our paperwork when she was alive, but I'd always kept copies of the important stuff. Bank statements, insurance policies, tax returns. I hadn't looked at any of it closely since Jessica volunteered to help manage the household finances after Michelle passed. What I found made my blood pressure spike. There were statements for accounts I didn't remember opening, a credit card in my name that I'd never applied for. The monthly statements showed charges I didn't recognize minus department stores I never shopped at, restaurants in parts of town I hadn't been to in years, online purchases for things I'd never heard of. I pulled out my reading glasses and started going through everything line by line. Hair salon charges for $150 th, Nordstrom purchases for $400 th, something called luxury day spa for $250, Amazon orders almost every week, sometimes for $200 or more, restaurant bills for $80, $120, $200 minus way more than I'd ever spend on a meal. But here's the thing that really got me, minus all the minimum payments were being made on time. Someone was staying just ahead of the interest, making sure nothing went into default. And I started to realize where that money was coming from. See, Michelle and I bought a small commercial property years ago as an investment. Nothing fancy. Just a little strip mall with a hair salon, a tax office, and a sandwich shop. The rent from that place comes in every month like clockwork minus $1. 100th for the past 4 years. That money had been going directly into my checking account. Or so I thought. I started doing the math in my head. If someone was making minimum payments of around $800 a month on credit card debt, and if that money was coming from a rental income, then I'd been paying for someone else's lifestyle for how long? I found the oldest statement I could locate. The credit card had been opened 28 months ago. 20 minus 8 months of charges I didn't make, minimum payments I didn't authorize, using money that belonged to me. The total debt sitting on that card right now was $32,000 th. But if someone had been making minimum payments for over 2 years, with interest and fees, they probably charged up closer to $50,000 worth of stuff. Stuff I'd never seen. Never used, never even knew about. I felt sick to my stomach. But it got worse. I found another statement. For a line of credit attached to my checking account. Another $15,000 that had been quietly borrowed and paid down, in a pattern that kept it just under the radar. All of it backed by my savings account. All of it authorized by someone who had legal access to my financial information. I sat there at 2 in the morning, surrounded by papers, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. Someone had been systematically draining my accounts for over 2 years. The rental income that was supposed to be padding my retirement had been diverted to pay for someone else's shopping sprees and fancy dinners. My retirement savings account, which had $145,000 when Michelle died, was now down to $91,000 th. I thought that money was just sitting there, growing slowly, waiting for when I really needed it. Instead, someone had been using it as collateral for loans and credit lines I didn't even know existed. The math was ugly. Between the credit card debt, the line of credit, and the money that had been siphoned out of savings, I was looking at about $87,000 in total financial damage, nearly $90,000 of my retirement security gone. And I had a pretty good idea who was responsible. I thought back to all those times Jessica had offered to help with my finances, how she'd said it was too stressful for me to worry about all those confusing bank statements and credit card offers, how she'd volunteered to be an authorized user on my accounts just in case of emergencies. I trusted her because she was family, because she was married to my son, because Michelle had always told me that family takes care of family. But this wasn't taking care of me. This was theft. I spent the rest of that night going through every document I could find. Credit applications with forged signatures, bank authorizations I didn't remember signing. A systematic pattern of financial abuse that had been going on right under my nose while I was grieving my wife and trying to hold what was left of my family together. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The question now was what I was going to do about it. I could hear movement downstairs, Jessica making coffee, getting ready for her day at the elementary school where she taught kids about honesty and integrity. The irony wasn't lost on me. But I didn't go downstairs. Not yet. I had some phone calls to make first. The first call I made was to Jerry Patterson, my old partner from the construction days. We'd worked together for 15 years before he retired and moved to Florida. Jerry was the smartest guy I knew when it came to reading people and situations. He answered on the second ring. How you holding up, buddy? Jerry, I need some advice. It's about family, and it's complicated. I spent the next 20 minutes laying out everything I discovered. Jerry listened without interrupting, which was his way. When I finished, there was a long pause. Son of a bitch, he said finally. Tim, you know what this is, right? This isn't family drama. This is financial elder abuse. It's a felony. I keep telling myself there has to be some explanation. Stop right there. Jerry cut me off. You know better. You didn't survive 35 years in construction by making excuses for people who steal from you. Your daughter Minus and Minus Law has been running along Minus Term Con, and your son's either in on it or he's too weak to stop it. But Jerry was right. In construction, you'll learn real quick to spot the guys who'll cut corners, overcharge clients, or skim materials. The signs are always there if you're willing to see them. What do? I asked. 3 things. First, you document everything. Every statement, every signature, every transaction. Second, you get a lawyer who specializes in this stuff. And third, you don't confront anybody until you've got an airtight case. These people have been planning this for years. You better be just as thorough. Jerry gave me the name of a private investigator he knew, a guy who'd helped him when his brother Minus and Minus Law tried to steal from their mother's estate. He also recommended a lawyer in town who handled elder financial abuse cases. After I hung up, I got dressed and drove straight to the bank. I figured if I was going to build a case, I needed to understand exactly what had been done to my accounts. The branch manager, Patricia Williams, had known me for 12 years. When I explained what I discovered, her face went serious real quick. Mr. Walsh, I need to pull up your complete account history. This is going to take some time. She printed out everything minus 3 years of statements, signature cards, authorization forms. What she showed me made my stomach turn. This credit card application, she said, pointing to a document, shows your signature, but it was processed online, and this line of credit was approved based on a phone authorization that was recorded as coming from you. I looked at the signature. It was close to mine, but not quite right. Someone had practiced, but they hadn't perfected it. Mrs. Williams, I never applied for any of these accounts, and I sure as hell never authorized anyone to access my retirement savings as collateral. She nodded grimly. Mr. Walsh, we've been seeing more of this lately. Family members with account access using that privilege to commit fraud. The good news is we have all the documentation. The bad news isn't angling this is going to be complicated. She explained that because Jessica was listed as an authorized user on my original checking account, She'd been able to use that access to open additional accounts and credit lines. Each time, she'd provided just enough of my personal information to pass the bank's security checks. She was smart about it, Patricia admitted. She never missed a minimum payment. Never let anything go into default. From the bank's perspective, everything looked legitimate. I left the bank with a thick folder of evidence and a clear understanding of how I'd been victimized. Jessica had used my trust, my grief, and my financial information to systematically steal from me for over 2 years. My next stop was Scott Martinez's law office. Jerry had called ahead, so Scott was expecting me. Scott was about my age, with gray hair and the kind of steady demeanor you want in a lawyer. His office was full of law books and family photos minus a guy who understood both legal strategy and family loyalty. "Timothy," he said after reviewing my documents, "what you're showing me is textbook financial exploitation. The pattern is deliberate, systematic, and completely illegal. What are my options?" Scott leaned back in his chair. "Legally, you could file criminal charges tomorrow. Identity theft, fraud, elder abuse minus, we're looking at felony territory here. But before we go that route, I always recommend giving the family one chance to make it right. What does that look like? We present them with the evidence and give them a choice. They can agree to full restitution, supervised by this office, along with some conditions designed to prevent future abuse, or they can face criminal prosecution." I thought about Ryan, about my grandkids, about what criminal charges would do to the family. "What kind of conditions?" I asked. Scott pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "Complete financial separation minus they get no access to your accounts ever. Full repayment of all stolen funds on a schedule they can actually meet. They move out of your house within 90 days. And I'd recommend family counseling, because this level of betrayal doesn't happen in a healthy relationship. And if they refuse, then we file charges and let the court system handle it. But Timothy, I have to warn you, minus going that route means your son could face charges too, especially if we can prove he knew what was happening." That was the part that kept me up at night. Kyan might be weak, but he was still my son. And Nathan and Sarah didn't deserve to have their father in jail, even if he'd been too cowardly to protect his own father. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "Take your time," Scott said. The longer this goes on, the more money they'll steal. And Mr. Walsh, change your banking passwords tonight. All of them. I drove home that afternoon with a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't going to confront them yet, minus that would just give Jessica time to cover hurt racks or come up with excuses. Instead, I was going to do what I should have done months ago, take control of my own financial life. That evening at dinner, I acted like nothing had changed. Jessica made her usual comments about my old minus fashion views on money management. Ryan stayed quiet. As usual, the kids talked about school. But I was watching, really watching, looking at the jewelry Jessica wore, the designer purse by her chair, the expensive phone she was always checking, trying to add up how much of my retirement fund was sitting right there at my dinner table. The next morning, Scott and I put our plan into motion. We met at the bank first thing and officially revoked Jessica's access to all my accounts. Patricia helped us set up new account numbers and passwords that only I would know. We also put fraud alerts on my credit reports and requested that any new credit applications require a minus person verification with photo ID. The trap is set, Scott told me as we left the bank. Now we wait for her to walk into it. I didn't have to wait long. Jessica's phone started ringing at 11:45. I am while I was in my workshop, pretending to organize tools. I could hear her voice through the garage wall, getting louder and more frantic with each call. She was talking to customer service representatives, trying to figure out why her cards weren't working, why she couldn't access the accounts she'd been managing. Around 2 p.m., she came storming into the garage where I was tinkering with an old saw. "Timothy, what did you do?" Her voice was sharp, teacher minus angry. I looked up calmly. "About what?" "The bank called. They said there were problems with the accounts, that access had been revoked. What's going on?" I set down my tools and faced her directly. "I've been reviewing my finances, Jessica. Found some interesting things that need explaining." Her face went pale, but she tried to bluff it out. "What kind of things?" "Credit cards I never applied for. Loans I never authorized. About $87,000 worth of interesting things. The color drained completely from her face. Timothy, I can explain good. Because you're going to get that chance. Tonight. After dinner. You, me, Ryan, and my lawyer. That evening, Scott arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, carrying a briefcase full of documents. We'd set up the living room like a business meeting minus papers spread out on the coffee table, chairs arranged so everyone could see the evidence. When Ryan saw the lawyer, he knew something serious was happening. Dad, what's going on? Sit down, son. Both of you. I let Scott handle the presentation. He was professional, methodical, devastating. Bank statements, credit card bills, forged signatures, and authorized applications. He laid out the timeline, the amounts, the systematic pattern of theft. Mrs. Walsh, Scott said formally, over the past 28 months, you fraudulently obtained credit in your father minus and minus laws. Naaman stolen approximately $87,000 from his retirement accounts. Jessica tried to interrupt several times, but Scott kept talking. When he finished, the room was dead silent. Ryan was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Jessica, tell me this isn't true. It's not what it looks like, she started, but her voice was shaking. I was managing the household finances. Timothy gave me permission to pay bills. I said quietly, not to open credit cards, not to drain my savings, not to steal from me. It wasn't stealing. She snapped. It was for the family, for the house, for the kids' future. Todd slid another document across the table. These charges are for spa treatments, designer clothes, jewelry, expensive dinners. Nothing for the house. Nothing for the children. Ryan's face was ash gray. Jessica, how could you do this? To my father. Your father has money just sitting there doing nothing while we're struggling to get by. She shot back. He wasn't going to live forever anyway. I was just stealing my inheritance. Ryan's voice was louder than I'd heard it in years. Planning my father's death so you could spend his money. That's when she really showed her true colors. Don't act all high and mighty, Ryan. You knew I was managing his accounts. You knew we were living better than your mechanic's salary could afford. You just didn't want to ask questions. Ryan looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw something break in his eyes. Maybe it was the last of his excuses, or maybe it was his respect for the woman he'd married. Scott opened his briefcase and pulled out 2 sets of documents. Mrs. Walsh, you have 2 options. Option 1, you agree to full restitution of $87,000, paid over 5 years at 6% interest, supervised by my office. You'll move out of this house within 30 days. You attend financial counseling and have no access to Timothy's accounts ever again. Jessica started to speak, but Scott held up his hand. Option 2, I file criminal charges tomorrow morning for identity theft, elder financial abuse, and fraud. You'll be facing 3 to 7 years in federal prison. The room went quiet except for the sound of Jessica crying. Not sad crying minus angry, frustrated crying because she'd been caught. Ryan stood up slowly. Pack your bags, Jessica. Tonight. Ryan, you can't. Yes, I can. And I should have done it months ago. He turned to me. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry I let this happen. Jessica chose option 1. She didn't have much choice. Scott drew up the paperwork that night. She signed it with shaking hands. $87,000 plus interest, to be paid back over 60 months. Her first payment was due in 30 days. That was 8 months ago. Jessica moved out the next week. Ryan found his own apartment across town, but he comes by every weekend with Nathan and Sarah. We're rebuilding our relationship slowly. Honestly, he's learned that keeping the peace isn't the same as doing what's right. My retirement accounts are growing again. The house feels like mine. I've got my workshop back, and I'm teaching Nathan how to use the tools the same way I taught his father. Sarah helps me make Michelle's chocolate chip pancakes every Sunday morning. People ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Jessica. The truth is, I don't. She made choices. She stole from a grieving widower and thought she could get away with it because I was too old to trust him, too broken to fight back. I'm 58 years old. I've got maybe 25 good years left, and I'm not spending them being anyone's victim. If you're reading this and you recognize something in your own life minus family members who control your finances, people who make you feel like a burden in your own home, anyone who disrespects you because they think you're too old to matter minus remember this respect isn't something you can take. And sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is show them what dignity looks like. Stand up for yourself. You've earned that right. Never apologize for protecting what you've worked your whole life to build minus whether that's your money, your home, or your reputation. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries, and the ones who don't aren't worth keeping around. Trust is earned through actions, not promises minus, and when family members start managing your affairs to help you, make them sure you're still the one calling the shots. Your signature, your accounts, your rules.